Hello, gentlemen, and happy Tuesday. These past few weeks, we've been talking about the priesthood, and especially the relationship between the priesthood and the church at large. Up to now, what we've been doing is we've been breaking down more and more the elements of priesthood and the elements of ordained life, the various offices of the priesthood, the various levels and ways in which we share in the one priesthood of Jesus Christ. Now it's time to talk about the ways in which the priesthood and laity interact with one another. Now that we've taken everything apart, today we're going to bring everything back together and talk about how it is that the priesthood and the laity do really work together ultimately and share in the one priesthood of Christ. I know, of course, that most of you are not called by God to be priests. That's perfectly fine. You're called to be husbands and fathers and parents and do all sorts of wonderful things. So today, in order to make sure that none of this just seems like maybe some fun little trivia to deploy at a party, we're going to be talking about how it is that the priesthood matters to the laity and vice versa, why the two truly need each other as we exist as one great church founded by Jesus Christ. Ultimately, there are multiple levels of complementarity when we talk about the priesthood and the laity. This is something we were talking about as well to a certain degree with matrimony, when we talked about the complementarity between men and women. This is a recurring theme when we talk about Christian vocations. Ultimately, the Christian life presumes we are all in this together. Men need women need men, priests need clergy, or lay people need priests need lay people. All of us need each other. This is what solidarity is ultimately about. We are one large church. One of the first complementarities we're going to take a look at then is the complementarity of purpose. Priests help laity to achieve the union with God that they seek. In other words, laity are the very reason that priests exist. Sometimes, those of you who have had Mr. Gillette for ecclesiology, I know he has a particular image where he looks at a triangle, the church hierarchy in terms of a triangle. Pope at the top, lay people at the bottom. And there's a certain truth to this, especially if we think of the numbers. Like there's only one pope, there's more cardinals, there's more bishops, there's more priests, there's more deacons, and then there's a lot of lay people. In one sense, that makes sense. And there's another sense as well in which that makes sense in terms of the Pope giving direction and having governance over the church. In a certain way, however, it can be helpful if we think of an inverse triangle, where it's really the laity who are at the top, and the Pope and the priests and the deacons and everybody else exists for the service of the laity. And in fact, one of the titles of the Pope, Servus Servorum Dei, the servant of the servants of God, recognizes this reality. After Vatican II, the Dominican theologian and later Cardinal Yves Congar spoke of servant leadership and said that the proper model for the clergy should be a servant leadership model. So that if I have a certain amount of governance, then ultimately that governance, the authority that I have been given, is to help others. This is ideally true for any kind of leadership. If you go to the Corps of Cadets of Texas A&M, the best compliment you can give a cadet is he takes care of his people. And conversely, the worst insult you can give a cadet in the Corps of Cadets is he doesn't take care of his people. You can cuss a guy out all you want. That's the one insult that matters for these future officers of the U.S. Armed Forces. And I would say the same is true for priests, for deacons, for bishops, for the papacy. The ultimate test of whether or not you are a good priest or a bad priest, a good pope or a bad pope, do you take care of your people? Do you use your authority in order to help people do their jobs? That's ultimately what it's all about. And I think we can see a certain element of this when we look at one of the ways in which the churches have been responding to televised masses, to live stream masses. One of the things that the priests have done is they've taken pictures of the lay people in their congregations and taped them up to the pews, so that in a sense the lay people can continue to be present for them at their masses. When the lay people aren't present at a mass, there's a severe loss of purpose. Is it theoretically possible for me to say a mass without anybody there? Sure, but it just feels weird, just as it feels weird in a sense for us to be disconnected, not to be present to one another. Without lay people, priests really have no reason for existing. And ironically, this time of division where priests and lay people and everybody are separated from one another really does help to drive that point home. The other way in which there's a complementarity of purpose, laity take the gospel message and the graces of the sacraments they have received out into the whole world, including places where priests are not normally effective. So that if priests are there to sanctify the laity then are there to sanctify the whole rest of the church, or rather the whole rest of the world, to sanctify the marketplace and to sanctify the businesses, to sanctify taverns and pub halls and pool halls and all sorts of places. The laity are supposed to sanctify the world. This was one of the really great things that Vatican II identified in its document Lumen Gentium. The lay people aren't just people who, oh, well, poor lay people, they didn't get ordained, God doesn't love them as much, anything like that. No, absolutely not. The whole purpose for the laity is to make the world holier. They receive those graces through the sacraments, and then they go out. And again, this is all about how it is that the church, all of the church, including you, yes, you, as a layperson, you exist as a sacrament. That is your calling. Without lay people, the church really cannot be as effective as it is in being a witness to all nations, as we are truly called to be. There's a mutual witness to matrimony. There's a complementarity to this. Priests witness to the goodness of matrimony by declaring that it is something worth giving up to God. Laity witness to the goodness of matrimony by living it well, by saying, yes, in fact, this is something that is good to live out. And so we see, for instance, individuals like Pope Francis saying, yes, family life is wonderful, to be a husband, to be a father, to have lots of babies, to have as many children as God wills. These are good things. And the reason that we give up marriage, the reason that we give up all of those relations is not because, ooh, sex is icky, sex is yucky, I got to keep myself pure. No, it's a gift from God like anything else. And that's the whole point. We say, this is such a good thing. As a gift to God, I am going to give it back up. What do we give to God? Things that are good. And so this is why we give up matrimony. One of the main reasons. There are other reasons, and we're going to take a look at those when we look at consecrated life, but this is one of the things that priesthood witnesses to. And this was one of John Paul II's main points in his book, Theology of the Body, which was the core of our discussion on matrimony, that both vocations witness to the goodness of matrimony by seeing it, one by seeing it as something that's worth living out well and proving that it is a good thing, and the other by saying this is worth giving up as a gift to God. One of the great examples of this is St. Francis of Assisi. G.K. Chesterton had a wonderful image. G.K. Chesterton himself, a married man. He had a biography of St. Francis of Assisi. If you're ever interested in reading more about St. Francis, I would highly recommend it. He also wrote an excellent biography on Thomas Aquinas, by the way. First, though, he wrote the biography on St. Francis, and one of the great images that he described when he was talking about how St. Francis was really a great ascetic. St. Francis gave up a lot of things in his life. He gave up a bed, he gave up nice food, he gave up quite a bit of money, he gave up all sorts of things, not because he thought they were evil, but because he wanted to give them up as a gift to God. G.K. Chesterton has the image of the sort of person who asks what sort of a cruel God would ask St. Francis to give up all of these things is the same sort of individual who would ask what sort of a cruel woman would ask a young man to give her chocolates and flowers on a first date. Clearly a very 1920s image, but still effective. We give people things as a way of saying, I love you, I appreciate you. I don't give somebody a secondhand thing, something I don't want to use or something that's poisonous to me. I wouldn't give my girlfriend poison if I loved her as a way of saying, well, this is bad for me, but hey, here, you enjoy this. No, if I'm going to give my girlfriend something, if I'm going to give my wife something, if I'm going to give God something, what I want to give as a gift is something that would be good for me, good for them, something we would all treasure and appreciate. And so St. Francis gave up so many things in his life of asceticism as a gift to God, saying, God, this is a good thing. It would have been good for me, but I present it to you out of love. I know you won't do anything with it because you're God, but I also know that you appreciate the gesture. And finally, when we take a look at the connection between the priesthood and the laity, we need to talk about how they both witness to the goodness of the world in different ways. Very often, the image of the cross is brought about to take a look at the complementary ways in which the priesthood and the laity witness to various things. In the sense that there's a horizontal dimension to the cross, there's a dimension that involves us in the here and now, and then there's a vertical dimension, a dimension that kind of has us looking up towards the heavens, between us and God. So married life witnesses to the goodness of the world. That's the horizontal dimension. Priesthood witnesses to the goodness of the world to come. And this is as it should be. When we talk about marriage, one of the things that the Catholic Church is constantly trying to fight is to say this world is good. God created the world. This was the beginning of our discussion on marriage, on our discussion on love. Matrimony witnesses to the fact that God declared everything good. Think of how the church has fought against heresies like Gnosticism and Manichaeism, all sorts of heresies which try and say spirit stuff good, flesh stuff bad. The married life witnesses to the fact that this world is good, as it should be. We should have individuals whose vocation is to look out at this world and affirm this world and say, someone's got to care about how things are right here, right now. And at the same time, because we aren't only about the things that are right here, right now, priesthood, and also, as we're going to see in the next section, consecrated life, witnesses to the goodness of the things to come in this world, reminding us, yes, this world is good. You're quite right. But then this world is also not all that there is. We are on our way as Christians towards something else. Could priests live without paying attention to the goodness of the world that we live in right now? Absolutely not. The dishes need to be done. Food needs to be eaten. All sorts of things need to happen. Priests need to remember that this world is something that is good and worth living in. Married people need to remember to look ahead to the world that's to come. And so the priesthood and married life both witness to essential goods. We each remind each other of things that are important, both in this world and the world to come. And so in that sense, we all in the church, we have each other's back, and we help each other pay attention to the broadest spectrum of goods possible. That is always the name of the game. How can we pay attention to the fullest conception of the goods that are here on this earth right now, and the goods yet to come? This is the church. All of us helping each other to have the broadest conception possible of goodness. The priestly life, of course, is not the only life that helps us remember there is goodness in the world to come, and that we need to keep an eye on things to come and develop our relationship with God if we are to live not just as sacrament, but also as mystical communion, one of the other models of the church that we said is absolutely essential and is a part of living out our lives as a sacrament. And this is where talking about religious life and other forms of consecrated life is going to come into play. And that's where our third and final section of this unit, consecrated life, is going to begin tomorrow. So have a good day, gentlemen. Keep a broad eye on all of those goods and do well on your quiz today.